Today's reading is from Rays of the One Light, Weekly Commentaries on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita by Swami Kriyananda. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. Last week, we considered the need for attunement with God, with the gurus, with the wisdom of others, until we make that wisdom our own. There is a strong and in fact valid belief nowadays in the need of standing on one's own 2 feet, rather than depending weakly on others to carry us by their strength. Swami Kriyananda was once asked, "What is the best yoga posture?" "That one," he replied, "which sets you squarely on your own 2 feet." Our strength must come from within. If that strength comes from the ego, however, instead of from soul consciousness, it is like a guitar string without its sounding board. The notes it emits will be thin and feeble. Our strength must come from within, but must be coupled with recognition of our inner link with broader and higher realities. The Bhagavad Gita says in the 10th chapter, "Everyone in this world whose life is glorious or prosperous or powerful, know that his achievement is but a little spark from the great sun of my effulgence." Jesus, in talking to his disciples, emphasized also the power of attunement with his own consciousness as a ray of the divine. For this ray had descended already through him in response to their devotion. It was a sign that God was already listening to them with receptive attention and did not require to be wooed in that way any longer. In the passage preceding the one we read last week, Jesus said, "I am the true vine, and my Father is the husbandman. Every branch in me that beareth not fruit, he taketh away, and every branch that beareth fruit, he purgeth it, that it may bring forth more fruit. Now ye are clean through the word which I have spoken unto you. Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself, except it abide in the vine, no more can ye, except ye abide in me." This was the meaning of Paramahansa Yogananda's counsel also, when speaking more intimately to the disciples of the need for their attunement with him. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
Good morning, everyone. Sunday service. It's interesting, today's affirmation it's curious how words change. The word discrimination. When I grew up, more or less, its academic meaning was to discern, to be wise, to see the differences, the nuances. Interesting that it doesn't mean that anymore, really. Discrimination is just the opposite. It's to see the differences and not see the sameness, the underlying thing. I think perhaps our book ought to change the word to discernment from discrimination. Perhaps someday we will do that. But it seems once again violence erupts in our nation, and though statistically it's almost insignificant in relation to our population and this and that, and even though it's been going on for forever, and so in some ways, from a strictly coldly objective point of view, it's what else has changed? Something has changed. People can no longer abide by it. You know, it seems like we're so out of touch in many ways with the basic truths and realities of who we are. And people are afraid, and they're reacting and closing their fences, erecting fences instead of building bridges. It's a challenging time that way. And when I think of reliance on the self, it always comes back down in history and culture to who we think we are. Am I black? Am I white? Am I this? Am I that? We see the urge like spring flowers breaking through the concrete even, or the hard ground. We see the urge to grow out of definitions of all kinds. Now, in the struggle to do that, it's not always clear, it's not always even wise, but the struggle is there. We say in yoga, we say in religion generally, in one way or another, yoga specifically, and so forth, we say we are not this body. We are children of God. We are spirit. And yet we get so identified with the color, with the language, with the different customs that we have. And we, in that identification, as I say, create these fences. On a little lighter note, before I get into it, I want to share with you, our friends, members here, Zach and Haley, are going to, in the yoga hall at Snacks, going to give us a little summary of their experience this last week or so in Assisi, where people, some of our younger members from all over the world for the first time gathered and to meet one another, basically. And many of them, some of them are no doubt future leaders of our work throughout the world. And so whereas our first generation, Padma and I and others, had that experience because at the time of the founding of Ananda, there was only one community in California. But the next generation doesn't have that advantage. They're spread out all over the world. So this is what they're trying to do. And Zach and Haley run the Camino Farm, the Ananda Farm on Camino Island. And I think they very much will appreciate this somewhat lighthearted story. But in its own way, it just shows how out of touch we are with ourselves, with the world that God has given us. So this is a conversation. Normally I don't like to read things, but in a setting like this, but this is too long for me to even memorize. So this is about a tribe of people called the Suburbanites. And it's a conversation in heaven between God and St. Francis. Now, Zach and Haley just came from the land of St. Francis Assisi, so for several reasons this fits rather well today. So Francis, God says to Francis, Francis, you know all about gardens and nature. What in the world is going on down there on that planet? What happened to the dandelions, the violets, the milkweeds, and stuff I started eons ago? I had a perfect no-maintenance garden plan. Those plants grow in any type of soil, withstand drought, and multiply with abandon. The nectar from the long-lasting blossoms attracts butterflies, honeybees, and flocks of songbirds. I expected to see a vast garden of colors by now, but all I see are these green rectangles. St. Francis, it's the tribes that settled there, Lord, the Suburbanites. They started calling your flowers weeds and went to great lengths to kill them and replace them with grass. God, grass? But it's so boring. It's not colorful. It doesn't attract butterflies, birds, and bees, only grubs and worms. It's sensitive to temperatures. Do these suburbanites really want all that grass growing there? St. Francis, apparently so, Lord. They go to great pains to grow it and keep it green. They begin each spring by fertilizing grass and poisoning any other plant that crops up in the lawn. God, the spring rains and warm weather probably make the grass grow really fast. That must make them happy. Apparently not, Lord. As soon as it grows a little, they cut it. Sometimes twice a week. God, they cut it. Do they then bale it like hay? St. Francis, not exactly, Lord. Most of them rake it up and put it in bags. God, they bag it? Why, is it a cash crop? Do they sell it? St. Francis, no, sir, just the opposite. They pay to throw it away. God, now let me get this straight. They fertilize the grass so it'll grow, and when it grows, they cut it and pay to throw it away. St. Francis, yes, sir. God, these suburbanites must be relieved at least in the summer when we cut back on the rain and turn up the heat. That slows the growth and saves them a lot of work, doesn't it? St. Francis, you aren't going to believe this, Lord. When the grass stops growing so fast, they drag out hoses and pay for more money to water it so they can continue to mow it and pay to get rid of it. God, what nonsense. At least they kept some of my trees, didn't they? That was a sheer stroke of genius, if I don't say so myself. The trees grow leaves in the spring to provide beauty and shade in the summer. In the autumn, the leaves fall to the ground and form a natural blanket to keep moisture in the soil and protect the trees and bushes. It's a natural cycle of life. St. Francis, you better sit down, Lord. As soon as the leaves fall, they rake them into great piles and pay to have them hauled away. God, no. What do they do to protect the shrub and tree roots in the winter to keep the soil moist and loose? St. Francis, after throwing away the leaves, they go out and buy something they call mulch, made from the same leaves they paid to have hauled away. They haul it back home and spread it around in place of the leaves. And where do they get this mulch? They cut down trees and shrubs, mix and grind them up with the same leaves they paid to have hauled away to make the mulch. Enough. I don't want to think about this anymore. St. Catherine, you're in charge of the arts. What movie have you scheduled for us tonight? St. Catherine, Dumb and Dumber. Lord, it's a story about... Never mind. I just heard the whole story from St. Francis. One thing Zach and Haley have taught the rest of us who were born and raised as suburbanites is the beauty of dandelions, and now I feel guilty when I pull the darn things out of my lawn. But you know, that's exactly... Now I have to say, we were down visiting with our grandchildren at Ananda village where our own children were born and raised many years ago. And I have to say that when our children were raised there and the village was still struggling and very sort of rough and crude out in the mountains and so forth, our children missed having grass to romp and play on. And so I sort of chuckled to myself to have my little grandchild Tulsi just dancing and playing and running all over the grass that they've planted there by the downtown Ananda village where the market is and the mailroom and so forth. So there is a place for these things too, but nonetheless, we certainly have lost touch with the basics of the world around us. We've set up these fences and so forth. How then, what is our solution? It's not complicated. Solutions aren't generally complicated, but we see the fences and barriers in our political system. We see it everywhere. It's as if it's going to have to come to a head, isn't it? Yogananda said as much in 1949 and in the last years of his life. And so if we can't learn by wisdom, by intuition, then we must needs learn the hard way. But not all of us need to do that. When I think of our farm on Camino, where they're you know, it's just so much fun because Zach and Haley, you know, you see these machines along the roads and the country roads and so forth, and they're cutting the trees, right? And so they learned right away when we started the farm a few years ago, well, you guys want to dump that mulch over here, you know, at our place? And so and we've received it at our community here where we also have farm plots as well, just great mounds of mulch. And they've shown where the simple natural gardening, natural farming is, you don't need, we don't even have a tractor out there. I mean, at first it was a controversy. Some of us said, you need a tractor, right? I mean, you can't farm without a tractor. And Zach didn't say too much. He just, you know, just ignored us. And there still ain't no tractor out there because you don't really need it. They'd collect branches from the forest that's part of our property there and use the branches to create, in effect, a bed, you know, sideways and sticks this way. And with whatever was there, they've been able to create this incredible farm. And I hope some of you, most of you have, but some of you haven't, had a chance to visit and tour or go to a farm supper and so forth. But this is one example of many. our school. In fact, some of you today might want to join us in helping we just had to move the school to a new location, and we need to rearrange the desks, and all the stuff that got moved there is in piles, and we need to spread it out. And with our school too, Yogananda started a school as a young man, as a young monk. The first thing he did was created a school. If you've read his autobiography, which is quite famous, when he came to America, 1920, when he first got his first property in Los Angeles in 25, the first thing he did again was try to start a school. It was premature because adults at that time didn't even know how to meditate, so it sort of had the cart before the horse. But he set for us the example. And when Ananda Village was first begun in 69, 68, whatever, 69, almost 50 years ago, 4th of July is approximately the date that the first land was bought there. And because we were there for 4th of July, coincidentally, we, for the first time in 20-some years since we've lived there, got to sit in and participate in the cute little parade with all the kids and the fire truck and all this sort of thing and so forth. And we had George Washington all dressed up, Abraham Lincoln, and they all gave speeches and so forth. But 4th of July, interestingly, is our anniversary of Ananda's worldwide work. And so I'm sure I had a point coming. Did I have a point coming? Anyway, it'll come back to me. And so it'll come. The celebration of 4th of July is that affirmation of freedom. And when you think about it, and very few people ever do, we think of freedom only in social and personal terms. But you have to start somewhere. The ultimate freedom is to be free of all these self-definitions. So you even see we see the women's movement, obviously, that goes back quite a few years. We see now in transgender, LGBT, and so forth, whatever else it may entail, spiritually speaking, it entails the affirmation that I am not what I appear to be. In so many areas of public social life, in America primarily, is this, as I say, this plant coming up through the hard soil of taboos and the hard soil of rules and so forth, and that kind of mentality is, I want to be free. Now, admittedly, most of it's ego-based, okay, but we have to start somewhere. In fact, the age we've come from was an age of tribal consciousness. The idea of having your own name, your own lineage, your own parentage, and so forth, is a fairly new concept on the planet today. And so, sure, we have to struggle with this, but if we have a world that's ego-affirming, and I think of Adam Smith, who gave us the precept that self-interest was good. I'm not going to argue with that. I mean, we all have to feed ourselves and clothe ourselves. There's nothing wrong with it. But enlightened self-interest would be a lot better. Because we see that when self-interest, driven only by ego, and driven to the extreme, armed with technology and weapons and monetary power and so forth, is ultimately destructive. And so the antidote to an age of, we could call this quite legitimately, we have entered the age of ego. The antidote to the destructive power of ego is an enlightened consciousness. Basically, nothing new, the golden rule. And yet we see that golden rule and its equivalents throughout history are nothing new. There was a book written by, who was the mystery writer? John Ball. John Ball he's long gone now, but he wrote, detective stories and stuff like that. And I don't know how he met Swami Kriyananda many years ago, but he did, and he and his wife came to visit us at Ananda Village. He stayed with Padma and I, and he and his wife Pat. And a fine man, but definitely a detective story writer, you know what I mean. And everything's sort of grim and, dark shadows everywhere. But he decided, he was inspired by his contact with Ananda. He wrote a book about Ananda. It's called Ananda, Where Yoga Lives. The book's okay, but basically he wrote another story, the title of which I forgot, and it was like a conference of all religions, and you know, they tried to, in this fictitious thing, tried to agree on something. Well, you can imagine what happened there, but all they could agree on was the golden rule. Well, it's not new, and it hasn't really changed much. There is something else needed. You know, self-reliance. I want to segue a little bit. About a month ago, there was a whole bunch of people got together, different government agencies in the Seattle area, to do some drill in preparation for the big one that's coming. It's overdue, according to what I've read. 8 or 9 magnitude earthquake. And, okay, I'm not going to ask for a raise of hands, but how many of you have in your trunk of your car a bag that has some good walking shoes, maybe a couple of granola bars, or whatever it is else if the freeways collapse and you're stuck and you have to walk home, you can walk home in those pretty little sandals of yours? What are you going to do with broken glass everywhere? How about by your bed? You have a little bag that you can grab when the house collapses on you or whatever, and glass is shattering everywhere, and with shoes and a coat and this and that, as they suggest. I went to the Seattle City website, and I was just curious, and it says right there, it says, each person should not expect any help from the government. You're going to have to rely on friends and neighbors and family for a minimum of 3 to 7 days. I doubt anybody, or many people in the room, are so prepared. Self-reliance is our part. And self-reliance in an age of ego is the right affirmation. But it's only the beginning. Because just as you aren't prepared for these things, according to our leaders telling us suggesting what we do, we haven't even done that much. And yet, the real power for change is channeled to us from a much higher source. I grew up during the 60s, came of age, and as you know, as many of you know, I've had the inspiration and the privilege to embark on an annual program bringing together the lives of Martin Luther King and Mahatma Gandhi. We do it every year on the day of Martin Luther King Day. And when you think of people like that, you think of people who come as the old-time prophets, really. Gandhi and King are so well known, they make excellent examples of people who literally gave their lives and yet channeled, and literally channeled, a kind of righteousness. This is right. This is true. And just as our consciences are waking up to these killings that, let's face it, are nothing new. But just as our consciences are waking up to it, and those of the communities in which they've been happening for way too long are waking up to it, that's what it takes. It takes waking up. And self-reliance has its power when we're connected to that which connects us all. This is the basic teaching of yoga. And meditation is the basic technique, the basic daily activity. I mean, we brush our teeth every day, we probably shower every day. There are certain things we take for granted. We are self-reliant in our hygiene and our health. We go to work, we try to do a good job. But do we wake up to see the connection that we have with every living thing, every living person? In our living wisdom schools, we teach the children to meditate. We teach them yoga. Imagine if, I don't know, even 10% of the planet meditated every day. Because when we still the natural turbulence of our ego-active energies, which are perfectly fine, we need them to survive. Thank you, Darwin. But when we quell those natural inclinations, like we just said in the affirmations, then there bubbles up within us a life, the life that we share with all life, the life of which we are a part of all. No one has to lecture us. No, we don't have to prescribe to a philosophy. We feel the life eternal, the life that we share. And when we do that, we have such a resonant sense of comfort and inner security and a sense of connection with the world around us that it's natural to see in a person who we might otherwise, our natural unquelled inclination might be to not talk to or not smile at or assume certain things about who and what they are. Those otherwise natural inclinations are sublimated into you might say, a supernatural inclination. There's no way to do it by precept. There's no amount of talking about the golden rule. No amount of saying you shouldn't smoke has stopped smoking. No amount of saying you shouldn't drink hasn't stopped drinking. It doesn't come from the rational mind. It comes from a higher power. And as the spread of yoga and meditation like a divine light encircling the globe, it doesn't require an affiliation, it doesn't require any sort of dogma and so forth. As this encircles the globe in silence, people like you and I and millions of others, our consciences are waking up. But unfortunately, the downside to this practice, the downside to this thing, is that we imagine, as I did when I was young and traveled the world, imagine that we can just do it on our own, for our own benefit. Well, not only does, I don't know how many, hundreds of meditation classes I've taught, and whatever many years I've taught them, people say consistently, well, it's a lot easier to meditate. When I come, I ask them, well, how'd you do with your meditation this week? And they all look down at their feet and shuffle their feet, and that sort of thing. And I still don't know why people go to yoga class once a week and don't do any yoga at home. It sort of doesn't make any sense. But why come to a meditation class and meditate and then go home and you don't meditate? The whole purpose is to learn to meditate. Anyway, my problem, I guess. But we feel the power when people come together. We see the power of people coming together to terrorize other people. They have a power too. Why aren't enough people? I don't understand why people in different faiths, in Islam as an example, aren't standing up to this. I don't understand why we don't stand up for it. I don't mean to condemn anything. I mean to be counted. Places like Ananda are places where people can be counted, to stand up for meditation. The idea, the American myth of self-reliance, I think of the cowboy. I actually like cowboys. I grew up with my share of cowboys in Salinas, California, but that's the real cowboys. This cowboyism policy that we've shown in American politics and military adventuresomeness, but also more importantly on the individual level. Suburbia, my house, my green grass. This whole culture of ours with fences around each yard. It's not going to work. It doesn't work. It's not working. It can't last because we are part of a greater world. The funny thing, especially in cities like Seattle, I don't know about funny, but it's interesting, is that there's not a suburban, probably right over there and so forth. You knock on the doors, you're going to find people from Asia, people from Africa, people from everywhere. And so we need to wake up to that. But we need to stop thinking, I live my own life. separate from everybody. I don't know who my neighbors are. I have my own career, my own us four, no more family. Yogananda used that phrase, us four, no more. Decades ago, he saw what was coming. He tried to start communities, but people weren't ready back in the 40s after the Depression and even after the World War II. But he saw that the time would come for people to come together virtually, or as we do in our 9 communities around the world. We have residential communities, but it need not be only that by any means. It's not practical for many people. But it can be in the affiliation of people to stand up and to say who they are and to support other people in the same ideals that they share, ideals that are necessary for the survival of the planet. This is self-reliance. It's not a threat. It was to me when I was on that airplane coming back from India in 1976 after a year of travel and trying to figure it all out on my own, failing to find it unsuccessful. That was the one inspiration that came to me in the middle of the night over Tehran somewhere in an airplane. And I sort of threw in the towel. I said, I give up. And what I meant, and I couldn't even articulate it, wouldn't even articulate it consciously in my thoughts, but I was now ready to not try to do it on my own. I knew I needed the support of, I could not have expressed these words at that time, but I knew in the imagery and the intuition, I had let down my defenses. I had read every book I could find in those days, tried every meditation technique that was available in those days, but I wasn't going you-know-where. Well, yes, I was. I got off the plane and I met Padma, almost literally, who had come from Ananda village where Kriyananda had started the community. This is what we need today. There's too many people in the New Thought movement who think, it's all the same, one religion, why should I bother? You know how bad those are. You get in trouble if you know how they... That's not going to cut it. We need to unite in various ways with people we do feel communion with, connection with. We need to stand up. That self-reliance comes from the support we receive and the support we give. What if there were just these 2 nice people here, Sue and Matt? Nobody was here. It'd be kind of tough to talk. You know what I mean? We'd probably just go and have a latte or just sit and meditate together. This isn't the same. And so this is what we're being called to do. To be courageous enough and self-reliant enough to see that we are part of a greater reality and to commit to that. To commit to support works that are in line with our principles, not just to take from them and read nice things on Facebook and go home, but to commit our lives. We don't have to be sacrificed like Gandhi and King, but we can certainly be part of things like Ananda and commit to it. We're moving the school today, so come, help us. It's just simple stuff. But it's instead of what? I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Yogananda's words from Whispers from Eternity. Help me to win the battle of life. O King of Kings, train thou in me, in the camp of discipline, the noble qualities of calmness and self-control. Be thou their divine general, like Krishna of yore, against the invading hordes of darkness, passion, and greed. Protect the celestial kingdom of my mind against entry by the tenacious warriors of evil. Let thy banner of peace wave always above the strong castle of my soul.